Well, welcome back, and today we're going to be in Chapter 10, which deals with performance appraisals. Now, performance appraisals are tools that you have at your disposal to be able to help both you and the employee. An appraisal can help you in as much as it can indicate whether or not your employees are performing up to standard. But it also gives the employee an indication of where they're at in the organization, whether or not they are performing according to standards. We use performance appraisals for all types of things. We can use them to promote and give bonuses and raises. We can also use them to use disciplinary action, or we can use them to give us an indication of what type of training is needed for that employee. So today and tomorrow we're going to be looking at this aspect of HR, which deals with the importance of performance appraisals. Well, welcome back. And today we're going to start a new chapter, Chapter 10. We just quickly went over Chapter 9 and glossed over some of the highlights, but today we're going to look at Chapter 10, and tomorrow we'll do the same as we take a look here at performance management and appraisal. Now, what's the difference between appraisal and management? Well, as you see here in the slide, performance management deals with the activities designed to make sure that the organization receives the performance that it needs from its employees. It's through training, development, what we saw in the last chapter. It's through the expectations and so forth that the employer has with the employee. Now, performance appraisal is measuring whether or not that person is living up to the performance standards that the organization has set out for that particular job, and whether or not that person is maintaining the standards. If they're communicating that information to them, that's our job to do to them, is to let them know how well they're doing, what areas need improvement, and so forth. So management is the process of making sure they are performing up to the level and expectation of the employer, and appraisal is the employer communicating their standard and whether or not that employee is living up to that standard. Now, the nature of performance management, we see here that an effective performance management system will make clear what the organization expects. And normally this is articulated in the job analysis, the job description, in the form of the KSAOs. There may also be other types of elements as well, such as must be a team player, must be able to communicate, and so forth. So here you're making clear the expectation, and you need to provide performance information to employees. This is how we expect you to perform. These are the performance expectations, and making sure that that is understood by the employee. You want to also identify areas of success and needed development. You always want to praise them whenever you can, to let them know that, hey, you are doing well, but there are some areas that you need to focus on. Everybody has room for improvement. So you want to start out praising them and telling them what they're doing right, but you also want to address areas that they may need to improve upon. And then document performance for personal records. And that is pivotal, especially when it comes to individuals that you may have problems with. You want to document everything that you do, just so that no one can say, or the person can't come back and say, I was never trained in this, I was never trained in that. And that actually happened with an employee that I was involved with. I didn't make the decision to terminate this individual, but the decision was made. And this person had a history of substandard performance. There was a thick file of training that had taken place, and the areas that the person needed to improve upon, they were articulated, but the person did not live up or meet those standards. And he had even made a statement, "I don't desire any more training." So really, when it came time to terminate him, he said, "Well, I was never trained in this or that," and we could have gotten in trouble if the person would have wanted to pursue it legally. But because we could document all of the training, his performance, and especially his statement that he didn't really want to be trained anymore in these areas, there was nothing that he could do. So that really saved the company. So we need to document it, and not just to cover ourselves, but to be able to indicate how far this person has come along in the organization so that we can further develop them later on. Now, figure 10.1 is a performance management linkage, and you can see here the overall performance management goals. Identify performance levels, encourage, measure, provide feedback, provide assistance as needed, reward and discipline or discipline those depending on the performance. And from that, you get the employee performance itself. From the performance, you get the outcomes, the performance management outcomes. What do we do in regard to this performance? We can increase their pay, we can give rewards, or we can, if they're substandard, we can enact disciplinary action. We may want to train them some more and develop them. So this is our side of the equation once they have performed whatever or not performed whatever we are asking them to do. And then from an organizational standpoint, we either have the goals met or not met. We have employee satisfaction or dissatisfaction, and correspondence between performance and pay. Are we paying them equally and fairly according to what we expect out of them and so forth? And then we have from there the organizational strategies that will go back into performance management. So we see a cycle here, a continuum that keeps going on and on and on, and we're constantly evolving this. Now, figure 10.2 is just the components. We want to have clear expectations and goals. We want to have detailed appraisal of employee performance, and detailed appraisal is important. Generic needs to improve productivity. Well, what do you mean by that? How can the person know what he or she is or isn't doing unless you detail all of that stuff? They need to have clear feedback on their performance. You were good in this area, but you lacked ability to do whatever in that area. And then manager employee training is needed, and that's an assessment that you make to decide whether or not more training or less training is needed. And then you have consequences for performance, and this is the end result here. Are they doing the job or are they not doing the job? And a comprehensive management program should lead them to be able to accomplish whatever jobs and requirements are necessary for that organization. Now, identifying and measuring employee performance. And then you have the performance criteria for appraisals, presence or attendance on the job. Are they there on time? Are they attentive to their work? What's the quality and what's the quantity of output? What's the timeliness of output? And what's the efficiency of work completed and effectiveness? Now, efficiency and effectiveness are two important words. Effectiveness means that they get the job done. Efficiency means that they get it done at the lowest cost. I mean, you may have a project for an individual to do, but if it costs more for that individual to accomplish that goal than the outcome is worth, then you are in a negative. You're not going to get the productivity that you're going to need. So part of this is what we call waste. So you want to reduce that as much as possible. Now, job duties. These are the elements in a given job that's identified from the job description. It's what we pay a person to do. And that's necessary once we have done the job analysis and we know what goes into that job. We need to task that person to show an aptitude for that. Now, when you're doing a job description and you're doing the duties, pointing out the duties, you have here this concept of weights. And weights are used to show the relative importance of different duties in a job. Not every task within a job description bears equal weight or equal importance. For instance, if I am an engineer and my job is to produce components for an electronic device, for instance, then I'm going to need to have a good, well-rounded background on these areas of electronic components and engineering those. But my ability to schedule work schedules, even though that may be part of the job duty, it probably doesn't have as much weight as me being able to engineer electrical components. So we would add weights, levels of importance that are attached to that specific job. Now, performance standards. They define the expected levels of employee performance. They should be realistic, measurable, clearly understood, and that it serves to benefit both the organization and the employee. And it also ensures that everyone involved knows the level of accomplishment expected, and can be both numerical and non-numerical. And assessing non-numerical standards can be difficult. So let me say some things about this. Performance standards usually come in the form of performance appraisal, and those are articulated, and we're going to look at performance appraisals here in just a minute. But when you have the standards, you need to be able to clearly communicate what you expect. As we saw in the other slide, the levels of employee performance. It should be measurable. That's one of the things that gets a lot of people. How do you know that the person is living up to the expectations of the organization? You can look at it subjectively, but let's say, for instance, you are not able to see that person every day all the time. That's going to bias, or that's going to affect your appraisal of that person. So you have to be able to make sure that you have measurable performance standards. Let's say, for instance, you must be, in your first 6 months of employment, produce 60% at least, or at a minimum, of output per day. Now, that's something I can measure, especially if you're on a production line or something like that. We can measure that objectively, quantitatively, and there's really no arguing that point. So it doesn't need to be subjective based on whether or not you like that person or you have a good feeling about that person, because that can mislead you. So they should be realistic, measurable, and clearly understood. Now, we have performance metrics in service businesses, and that can be difficult, as you see here. Got ahead of myself. How do you measure service industry professionals? There is no tangible output, for instance. How do you measure a professor who teaches? There's nothing tangible that we produce. It's all academics. So you might be able to, or how do you, in the restaurant business, how do you measure that, or the hotel industry? Things that are service oriented, where you don't create a tangible product but an intangible service. You might want to look at customer satisfaction, their experience. So instead of looking at quantifiable metrics, you might want to look at qualitative metrics. Rate your experience. How fast was the service? how likely are you to come back? So those would be some ways that you could measure performance in a service industry. Now, performance appraisals. I can tell you this is a very touchy subject for me, and I'll just get it all out there on the slide. They assess an employee's performance. Now, folks, take these things seriously. And the reason why I say that is that I work for a Christian school, not this one, but I worked for a Christian school one time, and the vice president wanted me to word a person's performance appraisal in such a way that if they wanted to get rid of her, they could get rid of her. Now, it made no difference that this person was a good worker. She did everything that was expected of her. She did more, in fact, but they didn't like her. So they wanted to have a tool to dismiss this person whenever they wanted to. Well, that's not ethical. That's unethical. It's not even legal, to be honest with you. But if it wasn't for the fact that she had good performance appraisals, and I refused to lie on a performance appraisal for them. It cost me my job at that place, but I was glad to be gone anyway from the way that they were acting. But anyway, sometimes a person's performance appraisal may be the only thing they have to keep their job, or it may be the only tool you have to justify terminating an individual. So performance appraisals are very important. So it does assess their performance. It provides a way of giving feedback, and sometimes your wages and salaries are tied to that performance appraisal. And it also helps identify strengths and weaknesses that they need to know about. And it also can answer work-related questions and improve job performance. You always want to start an appraisal giving praise, just like we saw a few slides ago. You don't want to go in bashing the person. Tell them what they're doing right. Document that. And performance appraisals don't necessarily have to come once a year or twice a year. They don't necessarily have to focus on negative things. You can have a positive performance appraisal at any given time if you just want to set the person aside and say, listen, I've been noticing what you've been doing, and we really appreciate your efforts, and I just want to put in here a document here of how well you're doing. So you can have a positive oriented performance appraisal. And I think we need a whole lot of that, more of that in business today. Performance appraisal and ethics. Performance appraisals may or may not focus on the ethics associated with how employees perform their jobs. And that really goes back to what I was saying in my example. They were not concerned about the person's work. They were concerned about the person. They didn't like this person. So they were going to use a work-related appraisal to justify their dislike of this individual. Also, tying ethics to performance appraisal is one way to emphasize it. And then codes of conduct, which is what you need, can provide useful guidelines on ethical behavior. Also, training can teach important workplace ethical values. So all of these things really are priceless when it comes to guiding you in the way that you should go. And communication can help promote an ethical culture. And that's one thing that we're lacking today in business, and that's ethics. So one way that we can really shine in our Christian witness is to be honest, to be informative, and to appraise people not based on how we feel or what we want, but how they're actually doing the job. Now, Figure 10.5 just shows us the two ways that you can use performance appraisals. There's other ways also, but you have the administrative actions here, which will either promote that person to higher levels of authority or be cause for dismissal. And then you have a developmental action that performance appraisals serve. and that's to identify strengths and weaknesses so that you can train. It also offers a means of career progression and so forth. So it's more than just sitting down with a person because you have to and telling them, okay, you did this and did that and the other. You can use it as a tool for development and getting the person to take on and helping the person take on more responsibility in that organization. Now, who conducts them? Well, several sources can provide input for appraisal. Supervisors, employees, team members, employees can rate themselves. You can outsource sources for rating employees. And here's what I like is the 360-degree feedback. You know, many times when you have a performance appraisal, you will have just one person doing the appraisal, and that's usually the supervisor who may or may not even know you that well. 360-degree feedback gives you the opportunity to rate yourself. You have your peers rate you, supervisors rate you, and sometimes even the customer can rate you. So you get a comprehensive, well-rounded approach to the type of worker that you are. And even though it may be more comprehensive and complex, it's going to be the most accurate and the most reliable source of appraisals that you can use. And this is just multi-source appraisal. For the 360-degree feedback, you have just a wide variety of people who are looking at you so that you get more than just one person's input. Now, the graphic rating scale is just a method of letting the rater mark your performance on a continuum from high to low levels of a particular characteristic. And some of the areas that they can evaluate you on are, let's say, for instance, descriptive categories. And that may be attendance, you're reliable, you're dependable, your job duties, which would be the job description itself. And then there may be behavioral dimensions such as your decision-making skills, your teamwork ability, communication ability, and so forth. So from high to low, a graphic rating scale will allow the rater to be able to judge you or rate you on these particular dimensions. Now, some of the issues with that you see here, it might not accurately reflect the importance of certain job characteristics. You know, your dependability may be ranked very high, but not knowing the job may not be ranked very high. It depends on the subjectivity of the rater. Factors may need to be added or removed depending on employee. And focus should be on job duties and responsibilities. And these are more of the person-job match rather than the person-organization match. Do they know how to do the job? Are they doing the job? Can I depend on them to do the job? More than just the person is a team player, the person is a communicator, the person does good at conflict management and so forth. And group traits can be rated differently by different supervisors. So you have multiple raters that can take a look at you as well. And descriptive words have different interpretations. Is dependable, what does that mean? Dependable can be interpreted in many different ways. Communicates well. Well with who? Do you communicate well with your peers or with your superiors or subordinates or whatever? So some of these words are subjective. And our last slide here just gives some of the dimensions or the scope of it, from outstanding exceeds expectations, meets expectations, below expectations, and is unsatisfactory, which you don't want to get. This is kind of what we call a Likert scale template, which goes from bad to outstanding, and it is just in degrees of progression from 1, as you see here, to 5 being the highest, and everything in between is just levels of movement that you can move around in to evaluate that person. Well, that's as far as we're going to go today on performance appraisals and management. So we will get back tomorrow and finish up. Well, today we got an introduction to performance appraisals. We saw what they consist of and the importance of performance appraisals. We also saw one of the scales that you can use when you're assessing their behaviors, their specific job descriptions, and so forth. So tomorrow we're going to take a look at a little bit more in-depth detail with performance appraisals. We're going to take a look at another scale. So until then, you have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.